In just 47 seconds, Barack Obama dropped a revelation so explosive it froze millions of viewers across America. His calm words tore through the White House walls, leaving Donald Trump raging as Congress scrambled to contain the fallout. When the dust settles, will history remember the fury or the truth that broke through it? In the next few seconds, you will witness the truth that they never wanted the public to know. In just 47 seconds, Barack Obama would unleash words that shattered the calm of a Wednesday night broadcast. But before that moment, Washington seemed ordinary, almost deceptively so. The East Room glowed under primetime lights, polished wood, gleaming cameras, humming softly like restless insects. Millions of Americans tuned in expecting another safe, measured commentary about roads, bridges, or budgets. It was the kind of slot reserved for comfort, not confrontation. And yet the air held a quiet tension, like the stillness before a storm. Across the nation, screens flickered alive in diners and barbershops, in crowded dorm rooms and quiet living rooms. In Des Moines, the sizzle of frying pans faded as waitresses leaned closer to the mounted television. In Phoenix, students huddled on couches, phones in hand, their chatter dimming as the broadcast sharpened into focus. A veteran in Ohio adjusted his recliner, muttering to his wife that this would be just another speech. And yet the hush that spread across these places told a different story, the kind of silence that feels heavier than words. Then he walked in. Barack Obama, jacket button posture, straight but not rigid, his eyes calm yet unreadable. The camera framed his steady gaze, the familiar pause in his breathing before he spoke. He wasn't just entering a room. He was stepping into history. Reporters shifted in their seats, sensing something beneath the surface, though they couldn't name it. He carried himself with a stillness that wasn't passive, it was deliberate, purposeful, the kind of stillness that makes even a whisper sound like thunder. And that whisper came not from his lips, but from the weight in the air. Sometimes silence is complicity. The phrase lingered, not yet spoken aloud, but felt like a ghost drifting through the room. It haunted the pause before his first words, pressing on the audience like a warning. Those watching at home felt it too, though they couldn't explain why their pulses quickened, why their breaths slowed. They were waiting without knowing what for. The director's voice cracked faintly in the host's earpiece. "This feels different. Stay sharp." The host nodded, barely noticeable, but his fingers tightened around the note cards in his lap. This wasn't the cautious Obama America had come to expect. There was a subtle shift in his shoulders, a gravity in his expression that made the lights feel harsher, the silence deeper. The stage was set not for reassurance, but revelation. In that moment, the broadcast transformed from background noise into a living, breathing event. The anticipation was no longer gentle. It was suffocating, like a coiled spring about to snap. America leaned forward, collectively suspended between curiosity and dread. And somewhere beneath the steady rhythm of his breath, Barack Obama knew exactly what he was about to ignite. Because in just seconds, the calm would fracture and the world would never look the same again. The silence broke not with thunder, but with a whisper sharpened into steel. Barack Obama leaned forward, his hands folded tightly, his gaze unblinking, as if he were staring straight through the lens into every living room in America. Then came the words, measured, deliberate, inescapable. "There are ongoing violations in this White House, unethical, illegal, dangerous." The sentence landed like an explosion in a locked chamber. The studio's silence didn't just hold, it suffocated. Reporters froze, mid-breath, pens stalled in midair. Even the hum of the lights seemed to falter. The camera zoomed closer, pulling the audience into the intensity of his calm. His tone wasn't raised, but the weight behind it pressed like a hammer on glass, each syllable threatening to shatter the fragile illusion of normalcy. And then, with the poise of a prosecutor laying out evidence in court, he began to list them: secret financial entanglements with corporations, feeding at government contracts, the careless mishandling of classified documents, and pressures systematic, relentless, placed on agencies sworn to uphold the law. Each word struck harder than the last, not as noise, but as blades of precision. Across the country, America jolted awake. In a diner in Iowa, forks clattered against plates as conversations cut off mid-sentence. A family in Miami turned down their phones, staring in disbelief at the TV, as though it had betrayed their expectations. In Phoenix, a college student whispered he just called him illegal on live television. And in Ohio, a veteran's hand trembled slightly against his armrest because he knew that calm voices often carried the deadliest truths. The disbelief rippled outward like shockwaves. Social media detonated. Hashtags surged to the top of trending lists within minutes. Hashtag Obama bombshell. Hashtag Trump exposed. Hashtag calm vs chaos. Clips were snatched, edited, re-uploaded faster than networks could respond. 30 seconds became 30 million replays. The calmness of Obama's delivery made the words hit harder, spreading a chill across living rooms and public spaces alike. This wasn't performance, it was revelation, and revelation had teeth. The host, visibly rattled, tried to push forward his voice, straining to sound neutral. Mr. President, are you saying the sitting president is committing crimes while in office? The question trembled in the air, too dangerous to exist, too real to ignore. Obama didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. I'm saying that we are watching a pattern of conduct that is both unethical and illegal. And the longer people stay quiet, the deeper the damage will be. His words were a scalpel cutting straight through the heart of denial, leaving no place to hide. Outrage now replaced disbelief. Supporters of Trump flooded online feeds with accusations of betrayal, of coups of lies spun for political theater. But for others, independents, skeptics, ordinary families, the reaction was different. In a sports bar in Dallas, the basketball game was forgotten. Beer mugs left untouched as patrons replayed the clip on their phones. One man muttered he wouldn't say it unless he knew. Another leaned closer, whispering, "This feels like Watergate all over again." And yet beneath the fury, a flicker of hope began to grow. Hope that truth spoken clearly might still cut through the storm of noise. Hope that calm could outlast chaos. Hope that someone finally had chosen not to stay silent. As Obama's voice carried across the airwaves, America was no longer asking what he meant. They were asking what would come next. And in that suspended breath between fear and faith, the nation leaned forward, waiting for the next strike. The first ripples hit like aftershocks. Within minutes, hashtags flared across every platform. Hashtag Obama bombshell, hashtag Trump exposed, hashtag calm vs chaos, and the digital world spun into overdrive. Clips of Obama's steady delivery replayed in endless loops, captions, screaming words he had uttered with surgical calm. Bars erupted into heated debates, kitchens fell silent as families leaned toward flickering screens in classrooms, turned into impromptu tribunals where students argued whether history had just shifted in real time. In Dallas, the roar of a sports bar was replaced by a strange, charged hush. Televisions that had been tuned to a playoff game now blared Obama's face subtitles crawling across the bottom: violations, illegal, dangerous. Men and women leaned over their drinks, whispering as if the room itself were wired. A few defended Trump loudly, but their voices trembled under the weight of what they'd just heard. In a dorm common room at Arizona State, a girl with glasses clutched her phone like evidence, saying, "This isn't a rumor, he said it on live TV." Her words spread through the room like a spark on dry grass. The disbelief turned into argument and argument into fire. On TikTok, side-by-side edits of Obama's calm composure against Trump's past outbursts went viral, captioned "Truth versus Fury." On X, bold headlines plastered across timelines, "Obama accuses Trump live." By midnight, millions of Americans weren't just watching, they were dissecting every pause, every glance, every breath. Each replay felt heavier, as though repetition could carve the words deeper into the national conscience. Then came the twist, the kind that flips unease into full-blown panic. A Washington Post push alert lit up phones from coast to coast. Justice Department officials have been quietly examining classified material handling for months. It wasn't proof, but it was oxygen to the firestorm. Suddenly, Obama's calm indictment didn't sound like speculation. It sounded like confirmation. News anchors stumbled to adjust their scripts. Analysts who had dismissed the comments hours earlier shifted tone, their eyes narrowing as they admitted on air, "This changes everything." In Miami, a Cuban-American grandmother clasped her rosary as her children argued across the kitchen table. "I trust that man," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He wouldn't say it if it wasn't true." At a VFW hall in Minneapolis, veterans sat forward, beers forgotten, the word illegal echoing in their minds with the force of a battlefield command. Even those who resisted belief couldn't shake the chill in their gut. The tension pulsed like a living thing. America was split not just in opinion, but in memory, half clinging to denial, half daring to confront what they feared to see. The night that was supposed to end with routine commentary had morphed into a reckoning raw and unstoppable. And as the cameras replayed the moment again and again, a single question settled over the country like a storm cloud. If Obama is right, what happens to the presidency tomorrow morning? The sun rose over Washington, but inside the White House, the air felt heavy, suffocating, as though daylight itself refused to enter. The corridors buzzed with an uneasy silence. Aides moving quickly, but keeping their eyes low, their footsteps muffled against the polished floors. Every television in every office replayed the same loop: Barack Obama leaning forward, his voice calm, his words cutting like a blade, unethical, illegal, dangerous. The clip bled into the walls, an echo no one could escape. Phones vibrated nonstop, lighting up with messages from allies, senators, donors. What's happening? What's he talking about? Tell us this isn't true. The staffers fielded calls with voices trembling, just enough to betray them, offering hollow reassurances they didn't believe themselves. The questions were endless, the answers vague, and the truth unavoidable. Obama's words had pierced deeper than any insult, any accusation, any late-night headline. This time it felt different. In the West Wing briefing room, a young aide whispered to another, her voice barely above a breath. "We've been through scandals before." But this, she shook her head, eyes darting toward the closed doors of the Oval Office. The reply came low and fast. "This one sticks. People believe him. They always believe him." The exchange was quick, almost invisible, but it carried the weight of a secret no one wanted to name aloud. Trump's presence, though unseen, radiated like fire through the halls. Staff avoided his gaze, avoided his shadow, avoided being the one to deliver bad news. They had seen him angry before furious tweets at dawn rants in the Rose Garden, but this wasn't the same storm. This was paranoia, a gnawing tension that even his most loyal advisors couldn't mask. Every aide knew the truth: Obama had drawn blood, and the wound was widening. The televisions kept rolling replay after replay, as though the nation's heartbeat was synced to that moment. Reporters outside shouted questions into the crisp morning air cameras angled toward every White House door. Inside, aides glanced nervously at one another, the unspoken thought flickering in every pair of eyes. What if he really has something more? The phrase looped silently, weaving through hushed conversations, gripping them tighter than fear itself. By mid-morning, the whispers had turned into dread. A senior staffer muttered as he left a meeting. "This isn't noise, it's a knife. He cut us down the middle." Others tried to focus on schedules, policy briefings, the day-to-day machinery of government, but their hands shook as they turned pages. Nothing seemed steady anymore. Not the walls, not the floor, not even the air. And in the heart of it all, the Oval Office door remained shut. Behind it, the man who had built his image on defiance and volume sat in silence, stewing in the echo of another man's calm. The silence was louder than any roar, and the staff knew it. The question wasn't if he would break, but how and when. By late morning, the air in the James S. Brady Press briefing room was electric, charged with the kind of tension that makes the walls feel closer, the ceiling lower. Cameras were stacked shoulder to shoulder, their red lights burning, waiting for a man who thrived on spectacle. Reporters gripped their pens tighter, knuckles pale as if bracing for a collision they could not avoid. Then the side door burst open. Donald Trump stormed in face-flushed jaw, clenched, his signature red tie hanging slightly crooked, as though even it had been dragged into the chaos. He didn't wait for introductions. He didn't even pause. "Obama spied on my campaign," he shouted, his voice raw, booming, ricocheting off the walls. "He left this country in ruins, and now he dares to lecture us. Give me a break." His hands slashed through the air, punctuating every syllable with fury. The camera zoomed closer, catching every bead of sweat, every twitch in his jaw. The contrast to the night before was blinding. Where Obama had leaned forward in calm precision, Trump lunged into rage, words tumbling over each other in a rush of heat. This is nothing but political theater, he barked, jabbing a finger at the rows of journalists. A desperate attempt by a failed president who's jealous of the success we've had here. In living rooms across America, the split-screen memory was inescapable. Obama's steady voice replayed in one corner of the mind, unethical, illegal, dangerous. Now Trump's roar filled the other. In a hardware store in Nebraska, a group of older men stood huddled by the checkout counter, watching the broadcast on a small TV overhead. One muttered, "He looks rattled," while another shot back, "Or maybe that's what fighting looks like." But even he couldn't tear his eyes from the screen. The unease began to seep through. At a coffee shop in Boston, a woman whispered, "He sounds scared." Her friend nodded slowly, uneasy, as Trump's face reddened deeper on the television above them. The more he spoke, the more frantic his gestures became, as if volume alone could drown out the echo of Obama's composure. Each outburst was meant to crush doubt, but instead it carried a tremor, one that independents watching from their homes could feel in their bones. A reporter dared to interrupt, voice steady. "Sir, about the Justice Department." Trump cut him off mid-sentence, slamming his palm against the podium. "The Justice Department. Don't make me laugh. They're part of the witch hunt, the hoax, the whole disgusting setup." His words spilled like fire, but in the roar there was no reassurance, only desperation, the sound of a man cornered. By the time he stormed off, leaving questions hanging in the thick air, the contrast was complete. Obama's calm precision had become a scalpel. Trump's rage a hammer swung wildly in the dark. And for the millions watching, the unease lingered long after the cameras cut away. That night, every network in America played the same image: two men, two styles, two worlds colliding. On one side of the screen, Barack Obama, still as stone, his words sharp and deliberate, a surgeon exposing a wound. On the other, Donald Trump, red-faced, shouting, hands cutting through the air like blades swung without aim. Anchors called it the split-screen presidency, and the phrase stuck like wet paint. It was no longer just about words. It was about how those words looked, how they felt, how they echoed in the bones of the nation. Newsrooms pulsed with urgency. Analysts pointed at screens, voices rising, comparing cadence, tone, posture. "That right there," one said, circling Obama's calm pause, "is power." Another jabbed at Trump's reddened face. "And that's panic." The side-by-side contrast replayed endlessly, morning shows, late-night comedy, cable primetime. Even people who hadn't seen the live interviews now saw the narrative crystallized into a single image: calm truth versus raging denial. The numbers followed quickly like aftershocks. Overnight polling flashed across Chiron banners. Independents had swung 7 points toward Obama's credibility. 62% trusted his words. Only 34% believed Trump's defense. The figures appeared in bold red and blue bars, visual proof of a fracture growing wider by the hour. In diners, strangers debated them aloud. In living rooms, parents explained them to children. In campaign war rooms, aides stared at them with pale faces and silent dread. The tension built, then snapped with a twist no one expected. Mid-afternoon, a Republican congressman from Pennsylvania stepped before cameras in the Capitol rotunda. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and spoke with a caution that betrayed the weight of his words. If the former president is raising concerns this serious, they should be addressed seriously. Hearings may be necessary. Reporters lunge forward, shouting questions, their microphones thrust like weapons. But the soundbite was already racing across networks, across timelines, across the very foundation of Trump's defense. Inside the White House, aides felt the floor shift. If even one Republican had cracked, how many more were wavering in silence? Phones rang faster, instructions barked sharper, but nothing could erase the image on every screen in America: Obama calm, Trump enraged. That juxtaposition had burrowed into the nation's collective mind, and no amount of shouting could drown it out. By evening, the country wasn't asking what Obama had said anymore. It was asking something more dangerous, more destabilizing. Was this still theater, just another chapter in America's endless political drama? Or was it the first crack in a presidency that had built itself on invincibility? The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to clear, impossible to ignore. Across America, the split-screen replay didn't just dominate televisions. It seeped into kitchens, living rooms, and the quiet corners of ordinary life. In Dayton, Ohio, a retired teacher named Charles Reynolds sat slouched in his recliner, the glow of the screen flickering across his weathered face. His wife sat beside him, knitting needles paused mid-stitch. Charles rubbed his forehead slowly, muttering, "I remember when Nixon started looking desperate. Not because we had proof yet, because he looked guilty on camera. The memory hung heavy in the air, a ghost from another era." His wife nodded, the silence between them carrying more weight than words. In Miami, the kitchen of a Cuban-American family became a courtroom. 3 generations circled the table, their dinner growing cold as Obama's clip replayed on a laptop. The grandmother, hair silvered, eyes sharp, gripped the rosary in her hand and whispered, "I trust that man." He wouldn't say it if it wasn't true. Her children argued, one insisting it was all politics, another nodding in agreement with her. But her words carried the finality of lived experience, of someone who had fled a land where lies destroyed nations. The younger ones, silent but watchful, absorbed every syllable, sensing the gravity, even if they couldn't name it. In Minneapolis, a VFW hall crackled with debate. Veterans, beers in hand, leaned forward as Obama's calm words played on the mounted television. One Marine, decades retired, spoke first. "I've seen men bluff." That wasn't bluffing. His buddy Army shook his head. "Or maybe he's just playing us cool, doesn't mean honest." But the silence that followed betrayed doubt. They had spent lifetimes judging eyes under pressure, voices in chaos. And the look on Obama's face, the steadiness in his tone, it resembled men who knew more than they were willing to say. Every household carried its own verdict, yet they all shared the same unease. In Arizona, a group of college roommates replayed the clip on their phones until the sound of Obama's pause. Those 2 seconds of silence before illegal became unbearable. In New York, a cab driver pulled over to listen, ignoring the honking cars behind him. In Texas, a family huddled around the television, their children whispering questions the parents struggled to answer. Each scene was different, yet connected like fragments of a nation holding its breath. The empathy spread across generations. Older Americans remembered Watergate's shadow. Younger ones felt the tremor of history being made in real time. The resonance was undeniable, a reminder that truth once spoken doesn't just live in the headlines. It lodges itself in living rooms, in kitchens, in the quiet moments between families who suddenly realize they are part of something larger. And so as night stretched across the country, the question wasn't confined to the White House or the halls of Congress. It was alive in homes, carried in whispers, arguments, and the silence between words. America wasn't just watching anymore. America was deciding what to believe. By dawn, the war had shifted from living rooms to newsrooms. Every network fought to seize the narrative, spinning Obama's words into weapons or shields. CNN's headline screamed across the screen, "Obama accuses Trump of ongoing violations." Analysts leaned over the desk, voices hushed but urgent, dissecting every syllable like evidence in a trial. "Did you hear that pause?" one asked, rewinding the clip. That wasn't a slip, it was intent. Fox News fired back their Chiron blaring, Obama's political theater, distraction or desperation anchors raised their eyebrows, their tones sharp, suggesting this was nothing more than a jealous ex-president grasping at relevance. Ask yourself, one commentator snapped, "Why now? Why drop this days before the midterms?" The camera zoomed in as if proximity alone could amplify their suspicion. Their words weren't calm, they were defensive, sharpened to cut down doubt before it spread. MSNBC joined the fray, their graphics painted in blazing red, illegal, and dangerous Obama's bombshell. Their pundits sat wide-eyed, practically vibrating with urgency. "He's too careful to improvise," one insisted. This wasn't off the cuff. He knew something. He's been tipped off. The speculation was intoxicating, dangerous, and impossible to contain. As networks collided, the internet detonated into a battlefield of hashtags. Hashtag CalmV's chaos shot to the top, a rallying cry for those who replayed Obama's serene composure against Trump's unhinged rant. On the other side, Trump loyalists flooded timelines with hashtag #WitchHuntTube or their fury typed in all caps, their posts shared at lightning speed. Each hashtag wasn't just a label, it was a banner under which tribes gathered, weapons drawn, ready to defend their version of truth. Twitter became a war zone of digital shrapnel. Side-by-side memes of Obama and Trump filled feeds, one captioned, "Professor of Calm, the other King of Chaos." TikTok edits blasted dramatic music under the split screen looping Obama's phrase illegal, dangerous like a chorus. Instagram flooded with infographics, each more accusatory than the last, as if color-coded fonts could rewrite reality. Confusion turned to anger as Americans scrolled. Comment sections erupted, strangers attacking strangers. Families dragged into online skirmishes that mirrored their kitchen table debates. A single sentence from a former president had cracked open the nation, and now the flood was unstoppable. Was it truth? Was it theater? Or was it something worse, an omen of collapse inside the highest office in the land? By noon, the frenzy had consumed everything. Stock tickers paused mid-discussion, daytime talk shows cut to emergency coverage, and late-night hosts prepared their monologues with sharpened pens. No matter where one turned, TV, phone, radio, the question pounded relentlessly. Was Obama tipped off by something larger? The frenzy wasn't just noise, it was fire. And America, caught between anger and loyalty, was already choosing sides. By afternoon, the frenzy that had consumed the airwaves spilled into the marble corridors of Capitol Hill. Reporters swarmed like a pack of wolves. Cameras raised microphones, thrust forward, their voices echoing off stone walls. Every Republican lawmaker who stepped into the hallway became prey-hounded with the same piercing question: do you believe Obama? The pressure was relentless, footsteps, quickening aides pushing through the crush, but the questions never stopped. One congressman from Florida tried to dodge, ducking into a side stairwell, as cameras chased the sound of shouted questions reverberating behind him. The image went viral within minutes, captioned, "Running from the Truth," spreading across social media like wildfire. Another lawmaker froze under the blinding lights, sweat breaking across his brow as he muttered vague denials that convinced no one. The spectacle was raw, unfiltered, a public trial unfolding in real time. Then, in a moment that sliced through the noise, a moderate Republican from Pennsylvania stepped up to a cluster of reporters. His face was taut, his words careful, but his voice carried a weight that couldn't be ignored. "If the former president is raising concerns this serious," he said, "then they must be addressed seriously. Hearings may be necessary." The air seemed to crack. The reporters lunged closer. Cameras zoomed in, and the quote hit the wires before he'd even stepped away. Inside the White House, aides watching the broadcast felt the floor shift beneath them. One crack in the wall of silence was all it took to raise the specter of collapse. If one Republican could say it aloud, how many others were whispering the same thing behind closed doors? The tension spread like a contagion, moving from newsroom to lawmaker to every corner of Washington. Then came the whispers, quiet at first, then louder with each repetition. Leaked fragments of documents, rumors of conflicts tied to Trump's foreign properties, investments, debts, entanglements that smelled of compromise. Nothing confirmed, nothing solid, but enough to spread like smoke under a locked door. For those already rattled, it was proof waiting to explode. For the loyalists, it was a nightmare they couldn't control. The Capitol crackled with unease. Some lawmakers dodged questions, others barked defiance. But the doubt was there, alive and visible. Reporters sensed it, their pursuit turning more aggressive, every non-answer amplified into suspicion. The spectacle wasn't just about one man anymore. It was about the system straining under its own silence. And as night fell over Washington, the question lingered in every whispered conversation, every hurried glance, every headline flashing across America. If lawmakers start to turn, how long before the system does too? The whispers became ink on paper. Just past noon, phones across Washington buzzed with a single push alert. Classified memo surfaces confirms concerns raised by former President Obama. The headline struck like a thunderclap, and within minutes the document itself, heavily stamped, thick with clearance markings, spread across screens. Its language was clinical, cold, but unmistakable. Every phrase Obama had spoken, unethical, illegal, dangerous, was written there, word for word. In studios across New York and D.C., analysts froze mid-sentence as producers shoved the memo onto their desks. Live broadcasts captured their stunned silence, their eyes scanning lines that mirrored the speech from the night before. One anchor whispered, forgetting the hot mic. He wasn't speculating. He knew. The clip went viral instantly, the kind of unscripted truth that no one could rehearse. Viewers watching at home felt the shift immediately. The doubt that lingered had turned into dread. In Phoenix, a high school civics teacher projected the memo onto the smartboard. The classroom, usually restless, fell into a hush so heavy it pressed against the walls. Students leaned forward, fingers tracing the lines on the screen, comparing them with Obama's quotes playing on repeat from their phones. A boy in the back muttered, "So he was right all along." A girl beside him whispered, "Then what happens to the president?" The teacher didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were fixed on the clearance stamps, on the proof that this wasn't rumor anymore. Cable news fed the fire. CNN's banner screamed in red, "Memo confirms Obama's claims." MSNBC anchors spoke with urgency, their voices sharp, calling it the most damning revelation since Watergate. Even Fox, defensive as ever, struggled. Their commentators raised questions about timing, about leaks, about political motivations, but the words trembled beneath the weight of the memo's ink. The document was undeniable. In living rooms across the country, families replayed the footage, in a loop the calm face of Obama, the raging Trump, and now the black and white proof sliding across their screens. It didn't matter how many times it played, the impact deepened with every viewing. It was as if the nation was watching the floor beneath it, crack inch by inch. Inside, the West Wing aides felt the oxygen leave the air. Screens lit up in every office, staffers clutching printouts like they were holding live grenades. The Oval Office door stayed closed, but whispers carried the president had seen it, and he was furious. What had been panic yesterday was now something darker, dread, curling through the corridors like smoke. Across America, awe turned into fear. The memo was more than paper, it was prophecy fulfilled, a warning no one could dismiss. And with every eye fixed on the screen, one truth echoed louder than all the noise Obama hadn't guessed. He had known. The briefing room was a furnace, lights, glaring cameras aimed like rifles. Donald Trump charged to the podium, jaw-tight, eyes blazing, clutching a stack of papers he never once looked at. His voice thundered as he swung wildly at the storm closing in. This memo, it's fake. It's another hoax, just like Russia, just like everything else. His fist slammed the wood so hard the microphones rattled. The reporters didn't flinch. The silence after his outburst was louder than his roar, broken only by a single question cutting through the smoke. A journalist from Reuters leaned forward, steady, relentless. "If it's fake, sir, why does it carry real clearance markings?" The words cracked like glass shattering. Trump's mouth opened, but no sound came. His face reddened, deeper eyes darting as though searching for an exit not yet visible. The room held its breath. For the first time, the man who thrived on fury seemed cornered. He sputtered, pointing at the cameras. "They're lying, you're all lying." His voice climbed higher, sharper, but the cadence was broken, desperate, each syllable betraying more than it hid. A second reporter pressed, "Does the memo confirm exactly what Obama said last night?" That was the trigger. Trump's hands shook against the podium, then he spun on his heel. The cameras followed as he stormed out. Shoulders stiff, the back of his suit jacket wrinkled from his furious exit. Shouted questions filled the room like gunfire. "Is it authentic? What did you know? And when?" But the only answer was the slam of a heavy door. The press corps erupted, not with applause, but with chaos, their voices overlapping, in a frenzy as the image of his retreat burned into live feeds across the nation. In living rooms coast to coast, the contrast was devastating. On one side, the night before Obama, calm, steady, deliberate. On the other, this morning, Trump raging, unraveling, fleeing. In a diner in Michigan, a waitress shook her head. "That's not strength," she whispered. In a college lounge in Oregon, students replayed the clip, laughter laced with disbelief. He couldn't even answer. The nation saw the truth not in words but in movement, calm versus collapse, truth versus evasion. Networks ran the footage on loop. Split-screen comparisons painted the story without a single anchor's commentary. Obama's steady pause beside Trump's furious walkout. Hashtags surged again. Hashtag stormed out. Hashtag memo proof. Hashtag collapse in real time. The narrative had slipped from his grasp, and no volume, no roar, no insult could claw it back. Inside the White House, aides moved like ghosts. Their whispers hushed, their faces drained. For them, the walkout was more than embarrassment. It was exposure. The mask had cracked, and the world had seen what lay beneath. And across America, as the replay rolled for the 100th time, the emotional truth settled like smoke in the lungs. Chaos can scream, but exposure doesn't need to raise its voice. The footage of Trump storming out was still echoing across every screen when the Speaker of the House stepped before the cameras. The marble backdrop of the Capitol loomed tall, the weight of history pressing against her words. She spoke with clipped precision, each syllable sharp as steel. In light of recent revelations, this chamber will conduct an urgent review. Subpoenas will be issued where necessary. The announcement hit Washington like a detonation, shaking both parties to their core. Inside the hallways, lawmakers shifted uneasily, their faces pale under the glare of fluorescent lights. Staffers scrambled with papers, clutched to their chests, whispering about names, documents, hearings. Allies who once shouted their loyalty now spoke in careful fragments, their voices stripped of conviction. Some ducked questions, others offered deflections, but the crack in the wall was visible. Loyalty wavered not because of betrayal, but because the ground beneath them was crumbling. And yet, through all of it, Obama remained silent. No statement, no follow-up, no clarification. That absence was its own presence, a shadow hanging over every conversation. Lawmakers asked one another behind closed doors, "What else does he know? Why hasn't he spoken again?" The quiet made them nervous, the way a battlefield goes still just before the next strike. The silence wasn't weakness, it was pressure building relentlessly. Across the Atlantic, the foreign press seized the moment. Le Monde in Paris ran a headline, "America's Leader Cornered." Germany's Der Spiegel compared Trump's retreat to leaders of failed states. London's Guardian called the memo an iron wall closing in. These stories ricocheted back into the U.S., amplified across social media screens, flashing with phrases like cornered leader and collapse of credibility. The international lens sharpened the domestic wound, making it harder for Trump's allies to spin the moment as theater. Now the world was watching and judging. In the Capitol, the tension thickened with every headline. Some Republicans pressed their lips tight, refusing comment, while others whispered about cutting losses. The thought, once unthinkable, had crept into the chamber. Was it safer to step back than to stand firm? The idea spread like a rumor carried by the wind, unseen but undeniable. And in homes across America, viewers watched the spectacle unfold not as detached citizens, but as witnesses to a slow unraveling. The speaker's words replayed on loop, colliding with images of Trump's walkout, colliding with whispers of foreign headlines. The pressure was no longer abstract, it was everywhere in the air, unavoidable. The Capitol was restless, America was restless, and the silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. The cliffhanger was no longer what Obama had said, but what the system itself was capable of doing. And the question crept into every living room, every bar, every whispered conversation. If the system can't protect the truth, who will? The echoes of the speaker's announcement still rattled the air when a closed-door meeting snapped shut inside the White House. The blinds were drawn, the fluorescent lights harsh, and aides leaned close to one another in urgent whispers. "Independence will decide elections, not loyalty," one muttered the words sharp enough to cut. The sentence traveled down the table like a contagion, the first admission that faith in the old defenses was cracking. At the head of the table, Trump sat, rigid fists, clenched eyes burning with the heat of someone who felt the walls closing in. He slammed his palm against the polished wood, the sound ricocheting across the room. "We're not going to let him lecture us," he shouted, spittle catching the edge of his words. His face flushed darker as he leaned forward, eyes sweeping the room, as though daring anyone to contradict him. But no one met his gaze. The aides shifted uneasily, papers in front of them, trembling from the vibration of his blows. They knew the numbers, 7-point swings among independents, collapsing trust among undecided voters, but none dared to read them aloud. Instead, they nodded too quickly, too often, their silence betraying unease more than loyalty. Beneath the surface, the truth was spreading. Rage wasn't persuading anyone anymore. One strategist's voice, low, finally broke the rhythm. "Sir, the optics are difficult. People are seeing calm against chaos. It's sticking." Trump cut him off with a growl, his hand slamming down again, harder this time. "Optics. Optics don't win, loyalty wins. Shout it louder, attack harder." They'll believe if we keep hitting back his words once commands that electrified the room now landed heavy, desperate like sparks that refused to catch. The air grew hotter, thicker as aides exchanged furtive glances. One scribbled notes on a yellow pad, then tore the page out, folding it into his pocket as though keeping a secret for survival. Another mouthed silently to a colleague, "This isn't working." The denial at the center of the room was unmistakable, and its force made every whisper sound louder, every pause feel longer. When the meeting broke, the aides filed out quickly, their footsteps clipped, their voices hushed. Behind the door, Trump's voice still carried ranting into the silence, insisting that volume could rebuild the crumbling wall around him. But in the hallway, the truth had already taken root. They were no longer asking if the defense could hold. They were asking how much longer before it finally shattered. The siege had begun, and this time the enemy wasn't just outside. It was inside the cracks of their own silence. The storm inside Washington spilled far beyond marble halls. Town halls, church basements, even school gyms turned into battlegrounds overnight. Microphones shook under fists, and local officials who once faced sleepy questions about potholes now stood against roaring crowds demanding truth. The air was no longer civic, it was combustible. In Wichita, Kansas, the mayor's voice cracked as people surged against barricades. "We deserve answers," one man bellowed, his fist raised high, his words echoed by dozens. The roar drowned every attempt at reassurance. A meeting that was meant for routine policy collapsed into chaos, the crowd chanting as though the walls themselves were on trial. In Atlanta, a mother raised a trembling photograph of her son in uniform. Her voice shook, but it carried like a gunshot. "If the president has lied, then every sacrifice my family made was betrayed." The room froze. No talking point could shield against her words. The applause that followed was not polite, it was defiant, and it left officials staring at the floor. In Birmingham, the anger shifted into something quieter, but heavier. A pastor gripped his pulpit Bible closed, voice low. "Noise burns fast. Truth stands still." The congregation murmured, some with tears, others clenching their hands tighter. It wasn't politics anymore. It was morality reframed through faith and fear. But the fury was not one-sided. In rural Iowa, Trump loyalists shouted down anyone who mentioned Obama's name. "This is all theater lies from the left." Their anger crackled through VFW halls and church potlucks as neighbors turned on neighbors. The split was no longer in Washington. It was at every kitchen table, every street corner. Across the nation, hope and cynicism collided. In small towns, people who had never attended a political meeting now filled auditoriums, their voices raw from shouting. In cities, protest signs appeared overnight. "Protect the truth. No more lies." Social media mirrored the fracture. Half of America convinced the system was unraveling, the other half clinging to denial like a lifeline. The meltdown wasn't chaos for its own sake. It was the country tearing itself open, exposing wounds left festering for years. Town halls felt like arenas, sanctuaries like courtrooms, and families like juries split down the middle. What began as one man's 47 seconds had become a reckoning the nation could no longer avoid. And as chants, prayers, and accusations filled the night air, one truth pressed into the bones of every American: this was no longer about speeches or headlines. It was about survival, about whether a nation built on memory and trust could withstand the fire of betrayal. As town halls across America boiled with anger, the rest of the world was already writing its verdict. Morning newspapers in Europe carried headlines splashed across their front pages in bold black ink. "America's chaos at the top," declared Le Monde. Der Spiegel called it a credibility collapse in real time. The Guardian framed Trump's furious walkout as the image of a leader cornered a man crumbling under the weight of his own denials. These words, printed oceans away, sailed back into American screens before dawn, amplifying the pressure that was already tearing the country apart. Diplomats whispered in corridors from Brussels to Berlin, their tones clipped, their eyes wary. Allies who once stood beside Washington with confidence now asked each other if America was still a reliable partner. "If their president is cornered at home, how can he lead abroad?" murmured one European minister, his words caught by a stray microphone. The recording spread online within hours, sparking a second wave of embarrassment that Washington could not contain. In Washington itself, staffers tracked the headlines like enemy fire. They printed them, circled them, stacked them on briefing tables, but the ink only made the wounds deeper. Allies whispering about credibility wasn't just chatter. It was the sound of loyalty eroding brick by brick. Every headline, every editorial, every mocking late-night sketch abroad was another crack in the facade of strength the administration tried to project. The fortress of denial was no longer airtight. Then came the twist. Amid the swirl of foreign condemnation, whispers began to surface of another memo. This one, even more damaging, tied not to mishandled documents, but to financial entanglements overseas. No one had seen it yet. No one could confirm its authenticity, but the rumor alone spread like gasoline fumes, invisible yet suffocating. Journalists circled like vultures waiting for the spark. The suggestion that more proof existed made Trump's allies tremble, and even the faithful began to question how much longer the dam could hold. The White House scrambled to dismiss the chatter, but their words rang hollow. On social media, speculation raced ahead of the facts. Screens flashed with imagined leaks, doctored screenshots, and unverified insider reports. For supporters, it was fuel to rage louder. For doubters, it was another nail in a coffin already half-sealed. The divide widened, and the ground grew shakier underfoot. By nightfall, the international chorus had blended with the domestic uproar into a single relentless refrain. America was spiraling, and the world was watching. The tension wasn't just political, it was existential, a nation questioning its very reflection. And as the whispers of another memo grew louder, heavier, more unavoidable, one question cut through the noise, gripping even the most loyal followers with unease. If there's more proof, can even his base hold? What began as one man's words became a test for an entire nation. The announcement came just after sunrise. Congressional hearings would be convened. The words rolled across television chyrons in crimson letters. Hearings set subpoenas to follow, and with them a collective shudder spread through Washington. The Capitol, already tense, now bristled with the electricity of something far larger than rumor. Cameras swarmed the marble steps, lenses glinting in the early light as if drawn to blood. Reporters shouted over one another, their questions echoing against stone columns that had seen the weight of war scandals and resignations. The speaker's words replayed across every feed. Subpoenas will be issued to top officials. For those inside the system, it wasn't just politics, it was the cold steel of law cutting through the theater. And the sound of those blades was unmistakable. Behind closed doors, subpoenas landed on desks like thunderclaps. Thick envelopes stamped with the seal of Congress slid across polished tables, their contents heavier than any paper should be. Names once untouchable were written clearly on the lines: cabinet members, advisors, aides who had lived in the shadow of the Oval Office. Some tried to remain stoic as they accepted the orders, but others paled their hands, trembling, the reality sinking in. The walls of protection were no longer impenetrable. In the streets, anger gave way to determination. Protesters gathered with signs not of rage but of demand. Protect the truth. Hear it all. Their chants rose in the morning air, echoing through the city's canyons of steel and glass. Outside the Capitol gates, barricades groaned under the press of bodies, citizens pushing forward not just to be heard, but to witness history unfold. For once the cries weren't scattered, they were united, sharpened into resolve. Inside the hearing rooms, preparations began. Rows of microphones were tested, chairs polished, nameplates laid in place. Every detail was examined as though the room itself had to bear the gravity of the coming confrontation. Staffers scurried through aisles with files stacked high, the clatter of paper and whispers blending into a single note of urgency. It wasn't chaos anymore. It was focus. Foreign press corps filled the back rows, their pens racing, their cameras humming. The world was watching, measuring whether America could confront its own storm. And in the silence between camera clicks, a realization pressed heavy on the air. These hearings were not just about one man or one office. They were about whether the system itself could endure the weight of truth. By midday, the city pulsed with anticipation. Helicopters circled above news vans, lined every curb, and the sound of chanting swelled until it rattled the windows of Congress itself. The question was no longer whether the truth would be pursued, it was how deep the pursuit would cut and who would be left standing when it was done. The battle lines were drawn not with weapons, but with subpoenas, cameras, and voices rising in unison. And for the first time, the system itself stood on trial. Beyond the barricades of Congress, the storm seeped into everyday lives, reshaping conversations at dinner tables and in break rooms. In Cleveland, a veteran named Frank adjusted the brim of his cap as he sat with fellow servicemen at a diner booth. The television above them replayed footage of the hearings to come, the word subpoena flashing in bold letters. "I've followed presidents my whole life," he said, voice gravelly. "But this feels like watching command break down in the field." His friends nodded, the silence between them speaking louder than any slogan. In Phoenix, a high school teacher named Maria stood before her class, trying to explain the headlines without letting her voice tremble. She scrawled accountability across the board, but her students were less interested in definitions than in debates. If Obama knew one teen argued that means the president's lying, another fired back. Or maybe he just wants power again. Maria watched them clash, her chest tightening with both fear and pride. The fracture of the nation was mirrored right there in the voices of the next generation. Across town in a small barber shop, clippers buzzed while customers leaned into the argument, as though every word could tip the balance. A small business owner, her apron still dusted with flour from the bakery, shook her head. "I don't care about politics. I care that my shop barely survived last year. If leaders are lying while we struggle, what future do we have?" Her words quieted the room because beneath the shouting, everyone shared the same wound: uncertainty. In Atlanta, a young voter scrolled through her phone at a crowded bus stop, her earbuds blasting clips of the split screen that had defined the last week: Obama calm, Trump raging. She lifted her head and said to no one in particular, "It's not about who shouts the loudest. It's about who I trust with my future." The strangers around her listened, some nodding, some looking away, but all carrying the weight of the same unspoken question. Families wrestled with the storm in their own homes. In Wisconsin, a father muted the news as his children played on the floor, turning to his wife with eyes heavy from sleepless nights. "How do we tell them who to believe?" he whispered. She didn't answer because she couldn't. In their silence hung the truth. The fight wasn't just about politics, but about the legacy handed down to those too young to vote, yet old enough to feel the tremor of history. From diners to classroom, from barbershops to bus stops, the story of the nation was no longer just written in headlines. It was carried in the voices of ordinary people, each one wrestling with the fracture, each one feeling the struggle as their own. And in those shared moments, painful, raw, unfiltered empathy flickered like a fragile light daring to survive the storm. The hearings thundered forward, subpoenas flying like blades, but one voice stayed absent. Barack Obama offered no interviews, no statements, not even a whisper beyond what he had already said. Days stretched on each one, more suffocating than the last, and the silence became louder than any speech he could have given. Television anchors leaned forward with furrowed brows, filling hours of airtime with the same gnawing question: why isn't he saying more? In the Capitol, lawmakers paced marble floors, their nerves fraying under the weight of uncertainty. Behind closed doors, whispers bounced from one office to another. He knew about the memo before it surfaced. If he was right once, what else does he have? The uncertainty turned into paranoia, gnawing at those who had defended the president with clenched fists. They feared that Obama's restraint wasn't hesitation, it was strategy. On the streets, citizens debated his silence with the fervor of courtroom jurors. At a diner in Michigan, a woman slammed her coffee mug onto the counter. "He knows something. That's why he's quiet." At a library in Oregon, students huddled in whispers. Maybe he's waiting for the right moment. The more he stayed silent, the more his silence became a weapon, forcing people to fill the void with their own fears, their own suspicions. Cable news spun it like a riddle. CNN aired roundtables dissecting his every move or lack of one. MSNBC framed it as patience, the calm of a man holding cards too heavy to play all at once. Fox thundered accusations, calling it proof that Obama was orchestrating chaos for political gain. Yet beneath all the spin, one truth echoed: nobody could explain the silence, and that made it unbearable. Then came the hint. Buried in a late-night report from the Washington Post, a line appeared almost casually. According to sources, the leaked memo may be only one of several files detailing ongoing concerns within the administration. The words hit like a spark in dry timber. Suddenly, the silence wasn't just unnerving, It was terrifying. If there were more files, more proof, then Obama's pause wasn't emptiness. It was loaded waiting. In the White House, aides moved like shadows, muttering about firewalls and locked cabinets, fearing what might already be outside their control. In Congress, the whispers deepened. If one memo could shake the system, a trove could bury it. And in living rooms across America, the speculation reached a fever pitch. The silence was no longer the absence of sound, it was the drumbeat of dread. And as the cameras rolled, as the hearings swelled, as the nation braced for what might come next, the question hung heavier than any headline. Was Obama's silence his shield or his final weapon? When the shouting ended, what remained was a question of trust. Across America, televisions flickered with the same haunting contrast: Barack Obama leaning forward calm and precise versus Donald Trump storming from the podium, face-flushed voice breaking under the weight of rage. The networks didn't need commentary. The split screen itself told the story. One image was steady as bedrock, the other a storm unraveling before the world's eyes. In homes from Maine to California, the replay never lost its sting. Families watched in silence, some whispering, others shaking their heads. It wasn't just about what had been said, but how it had been delivered. Obama's composure had carved itself into memory like stone, while Trump's collapse left behind only the sound of a slamming door. The nation had been forced to choose between steadiness and shouting, and the decision was already showing in the numbers. Flash polls lit up screens, their bars stretching across the bottom in red and blue. Trust in Obama's credibility surged to unprecedented levels, while faith in Trump's words sank into the low 30s. The margins weren't temporary fluctuations. They were fractures, permanent breaks in public confidence. Analysts stared into the camera with voices hushed, calling it a trust gap that may never close. And in that moment, it was clear the fight was no longer about politics. It was about memory, about truth, about who the country believed when it mattered most. At a firehouse in Pennsylvania, retired workers sat around a scarred wooden table replaying the footage on a small TV. One man, gray-haired and weary, tapped the screen with his finger. "That's what leadership looks like," he said, pointing to Obama's still frame. Another scoffed, shaking his head. "Or maybe that's just theater." But even as he spoke, his eyes lingered longer on the image of calm than the outburst of fury beside it. In a college auditorium in Oregon, students gathered to debate the fallout. The words on the projector, "Truth versus Fury," framed the discussion. "Shouting doesn't make something true," one student argued. Another countered, "But silence can be strategy too." Their voices rose and collided, but the tension wasn't chaos. It was the sound of a generation wrestling with the weight of what trust should mean. The divide was visible, sharp, and unrelenting. Yet beneath it ran a steady undercurrent, the recognition that calm had carried the day that fury had failed to hold. The split screen was more than an image. It was a mirror forcing America to see itself in two reflections and decide which one it trusted. By nightfall, the hashtags told the verdict. Hashtag steady wins climbed the charts, followed closely by hashtag truth over noise. And though the shouting would continue in rallies, in town halls, and endless feeds, one truth had already lodged itself in the national conscience: steadiness had outlasted the storm. Historians would later sit before cameras, their voices calm but weighted with finality. "He didn't out-yell him," one said, staring into the lens. "He out-truthed him." The line echoed across broadcasts and print, a phrase destined to slip into textbooks alongside the darkest and brightest chapters of American history. It wasn't the noise that endured, it was the clarity. Families began telling the story in their own homes, weaving it into the fabric of memory. In Ohio, a grandfather sat with his grandchildren, recalling the night when the nation's faith split like glass under pressure. He described how one president roared and another spoke with quiet certainty, and how people everywhere were forced to choose which voice to believe. The children listened wide-eyed, sensing they were inheriting a parable, not just a headline. Across the country, parallels to Watergate surfaced like ghosts. Teachers drew the comparison in classrooms, sketching timelines on whiteboards, reminding students that truth always finds a way to break the surface. For older Americans, déjà vu struck deep: the same disbelief, the same erosion of certainty, the same slow collapse of denial. But this time, they told their children they had witnessed the lesson unfold live in high definition across every screen in the nation. The hope lay not in the fury of the moment, but in remembrance. People discovered that memory itself was a weapon sharper than any speech, steadier than any outburst. By retelling the story, by framing it as a clash between truth and noise, families turned chaos into clarity. And in that clarity, they found something to hold on to, a reminder that in the darkest hours, it is not the loudest voice that endures, but the truest one. History isn't shaped by noise, it's shaped by what people choose to remember. That closing narration rolled across the final montage, images flickering one after another, the East Room bathed in white light, Obama's steady gaze. Trump's storming exit, the memo stamped classified. These were not just scenes of politics, but fragments of a nation's memory waiting to be stitched into legacy. In living rooms, families sat together as they had in darker chapters of American history. Parents who once told their children about Vietnam, Watergate, and 9/11 now spoke of this moment. They described the split screen that divided a country, one man, calm, deliberate, unshaken. The other red-faced, shouting, then walking away. The children listened wide-eyed, trying to understand how history could turn on a pause, a word, a silence. In churches and community halls, leaders framed the lesson in moral tones. Noise burns fast, one pastor told his congregation, but truth lingers. The crowd nodded, murmurs rippling like a quiet hymn. In mosques and temples, similar words echoed, reframing the week's chaos, not as partisan struggle, but as a universal test of integrity. For many, the story wasn't about politics anymore. It was about what it meant to hold on to honesty in a world built on shouting. At universities, professors used the hearings as case studies, clicking through slides that showed poll numbers, headlines, and transcripts. Yet the real lesson wasn't in the data, but in the silence that followed each clip of Obama's words. Students noticed it immediately. Why did it hit harder when he paused, one asked aloud. The answer was in the room itself, because the quiet gave space for truth to breathe, while fury suffocated itself in its own noise. Across the Atlantic, foreign newspapers carried the story not as gossip, but as cautionary tale. The collapse of fury, one headline read. Another, the calm that broke the storm. America's allies and rivals alike absorbed the lesson that even the most powerful office on earth could fracture under the weight of unshaken truth. For some, it was a vindication of democracy's resilience. For others, it was a warning that the line between strength and chaos is perilously thin. And yet the most enduring legacy was not in the halls of Congress or the studios of cable news. It was in the voices of ordinary people who told each other what they saw, what they felt, what they chose to remember. A veteran in a VFW hall explained to his grandson that calmness in battle is the surest sign of knowledge. A school teacher in Oregon reminded her students that history is not written by the loudest voice, but by the one that endures after the echoes fade. A grandmother in Miami told her family that trust once broken must be earned back, not with shouting, but with truth. As days turned into weeks, the story hardened into memory. The hashtags vanished, the debates cooled, but the image remained calm against chaos, truth against fury. It would never be forgotten because it had cut too deep into the nation's collective soul. People no longer asked whether Obama was right. They asked how long it would take for the system to honor what he had revealed. And they knew the answer would not come from noise, but from persistence. The narration returned, its voice steady, its words etched like scripture. When the noise fades, will we remember the truth or the story told the loudest? It was not a conclusion, but a challenge. A mirror held to every household, every community, every citizen. History was no longer abstract. It was personal, waiting to be chosen, remembered, defended. And in that final quiet moment, as the screen faded to black, the human message remained clear. Fury may dominate the headlines, but calm truth defines the legacy. Not the shouts, not the chaos, not the noise, but the steadiness that outlasts them all. In life as in history, the loudest voice is not always the truest. What lasts is not fury, but the calm courage to speak honestly, even when silence feels safer. For those of us who've seen decades of change, the lesson is clear: leadership is measured not by shouting, but by the steadiness that earns trust. In our homes, communities, and choices, we can choose clarity over noise. The legacy we leave depends on what we uphold today. When the noise around you grows deafening, will you add to it or stand firm for truth? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything, like subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.